Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. They're finally here, AMD's RX 6000 series that have been highly anticipated by the PC hardware community for what seemed like an eternity, but today we finally got to see what AMD and the Radeon Technologies group had been cooking, and well, it looks like the wait may have been worth it. Over the last 5 years or so, it was mutually agreed within the PC hardware community that AMD just weren't able to compete with Nvidia in the high-end segment when and where it mattered. The R9 Fury X was barely able to keep up with the 980 Ti, they didn't compete with the high-end Pascal 10 series until a year later, and with power-hungry GPUs that ran hot and loud. Oh, and they also didn't even have an answer for the 1080 Ti. The RTX 20 series was pretty underwhelming, but AMD still didn't have any GPUs that could compete against the likes of a 2080 Ti or 2080 Super. Sure, AMD did make a bit of progress with RDNA 1, where the 5700 XT and 5700 traded blows with the 2070 Super and 2060 Super, but people were still longing for AMD to compete in the high-end and enthusiast segment, just like they did with the 290X. Well, today marks the day where AMD make their return back into those market segments, and it looks like competition in the GPU market has returned. AMD had announced 3 new graphics cards today, and along with that talked about a whole bunch of new features, architectural advancements RDNA 2 brings, and fidelity upgrades. So starting off, let's just get right into the meat and potatoes of the announcement and talk about the 3 graphics cards, and then we'll discuss the rest later. The first GPU AMD announced was the RX 6800 XT. This GPU will have 72 compute units, a game clock of 2015 MHz, and a boost clock of 2250 MHz. 128 megabytes of infinity cache, which we'll discuss later, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, with a total board power of 300 watts. They introduced the RX 6800 XT as being a 4K gaming graphics card, showcasing the card's performance and many modern and popular AAA titles, with the RX 6800 XT getting well above 60 FPS in many titles, and in some cases getting well above 100 FPS, making 4K high refresh rate gaming possible on the AMD side of things. Now, in terms of how it stacks up against the competition, the RX 6800 XT does quite well against the RTX 3080, where they seem to be trading blows and delivering very comparable performance for the most part. The only game which shows a significant advantage for the RX 6800 XT would be Battlefield 5, and that game generally always ran better on AMD hardware at 1440p, and the story is the same here, where both cards offer similar performance, with the RX 6800 XT beating out the RTX 3080 by a significant margin in Battlefield. However, I do think that due to the way AMD's RDNA 2 architecture was designed, it'll be a lot more efficient at lower resolutions, and I wouldn't be surprised to see AMD dominating against Nvidia at those lower resolutions, where we have seen the RTX 3080 just not able to run at its full potential, even at 1440p and barely being faster than a previous gen graphics card. So I was very excited and pleased to see this. Obviously, wait for third-party benchmarks and reviews to validate these claims, but I think for the most part we will be seeing these cards deliver comparable performance in many games if there aren't any vendor exclusive technologies involved. And this right here will be a huge factor in how the manufacturers will perform in a specific game. As you guys just saw, all of these benchmarks were done showcasing raw performance. There wasn't any ray tracing involved, nor was there any sort of super sampling tech enabled either, like DLSS. And that's the catch. In this presentation, AMD refrained from talking about ray tracing performance and didn't mention anything in regards to their version of DLSS, and there's a pretty good reason for that, which we'll discuss later on in the video. The RX 6800 XT will be available on November 18th for $649. So essentially, if all you care about is raw traditional rasterization performance, you can get a more efficient and cheaper RTX 3080. And I do think this card will sell, considering it also gives you 6 gigabytes of more VRAM. Moving on, and they also announced the RX 6800. This graphics card will have 60 compute units with a game clock of 1815 MHz and a boost clock of 2105 MHz, 128 megabytes of infinity cache just like the RX 6800 XT, and 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory with a 250 watt total board power. So on paper, the 6800 definitely looks like an appealing card. It actually doesn't seem like it'll be too far far off from the 6800 XT. They proceed to compare this card against Nvidia's RTX 2080 Ti, and this was smart positioning in my opinion. It seems to deliver a playable experience at 4K and is generally faster than the 2080 Ti in all scenarios, with the worst cases being that it ties the 2080 Ti. Now, I know some of you might be wondering why they didn't compare it against the 3070. Well, for starters, the 3070 isn't technically out yet, and its review embargo only lifted yesterday. However, the 3070 and 2080 Ti practically offer the same level of performance, so by showing us this comparison, they are also technically showing us how this GPU will compete against the RTX 3070. Now, do keep in mind though that in this comparison, the 6800 is utilizing their new Smart Access memory feature, which essentially allows higher performance through leveraging high bandwidth memory when the GPU is paired with a Ryzen 5000 series processor, which does require an X570 motherboard and needs to be enabled in the BIOS. Exactly how much this new feature will boost performance still remains to be seen and needs to be thoroughly tested, but they claim it will provide a performance uplift of up to 13% in their tests with the RX 6800 XT. So the performance comparison here against the 2080 Ti isn't exactly fair because they are using additional performance improvement features. So I reckon that without Smart Access memory, the 6800 should be more on par with the 2080 Ti or RTX 3070, maybe just slightly edging them out. This GPU will also be available to gamers on the 18th of November, with an MSRP of $579. While I was okay with the pricing of the RX 6800 XT, I'm not a fan of where they positioned this card in terms of pricing. Since AMD themselves compared the 6800 to the 2080 Ti, albeit with a faster configuration, they really should have priced it a bit lower at $529 if they wanted to make a statement that, hey, we have this great RTX 3070 competitor, except our card is generally a bit faster, and you do also get double the VRAM. At $579, it is a bit of a tough sell, and I think that with the RTX 3070 being $80 cheaper, its sales won't be impacted too much, if at all, due to how AMD priced the card. At $530, the 6800 would have definitely been mostly competitive and probably dominated that segment. I say mostly because there's a very good reason why many people in the graphics card market for gaming will still choose Nvidia regardless of whatever AMD puts out. Lastly, Lisa Su saved the best for last, revealing the RX 6900 XT, the biggest Navi 21 GPU sporting 80 compute units, a game and boost clock of 2015 MHz and 2250 MHz respectively, 120 MB of Infinity Cache, 16 GB of GDDR6 memory, and all at just 300 watts of total board power. They directly compare this card to Nvidia's top dog, the RTX 3090, except this time they have both Rage Mode and Smart Access memory enabled on the RX 6900 XT. Now, Rage Mode is essentially a one-click overclocking feature that Scott Herkelman introduced, as it allows the GPU to fully maximize its boost clocks to sustain the highest performance that the GPU will allow. Now, don't get confused by this and think that it'll automatically add a frequency offset. The way it works is that it essentially raises the power limits and probably runs the fans with a more aggressive curve for lower thermals, allowing the GPU to sustain higher boost clocks for longer due to a lower headroom. So when both Rage Mode and Smart Access memory are enabled, this essentially allows the 6900 XT to trade blows with the RTX 3090, winning in some cases and losing in some cases, but relative performance overall seems to be close. Although, like I said, I want to see actual benchmarks of these two GPUs being compared without any extra performance enhancing features involved. However, what sweetens the deal is AMD is revealing that the 6900 XT will be available on the 8th of December for just $999, which I know $1,000 for a graphics card is a lot of money, but compared to the $1,500 that Nvidia charges for the RTX 3090, this just seems like an absolute bargain, as you'll essentially get the same give or take 5% performance when comparing the cards in regards to traditional rasterization performance. Now, I mentioned traditional rasterization performance, but one of the biggest selling factors of this generation will be features like ray tracing and other tech like super sampling. I did also mention this in my previous videos where I covered leaks and rumors that this time around, it's not just going to be about who can deliver the highest raw performance, but many games are starting to come out and support Microsoft's DirectX ray tracing API and Nvidia's DLSS 2.0, which is a very impressive super sampling technology that allows gamers to enjoy high-res and high-fidelity content while maintaining high frame rates. Those kinds of features do go hand in hand because when you enable ray tracing effects, it can significantly tank FPS because of how performance tax heavy it is. But With the help of DLSS, you can boost performance back up so you can have a great visual experience while also being able to enjoy it with smooth gameplay. And I did also say that AMD would have to have an answer for these features and showcase their own implementations. Well, unfortunately, throughout this presentation, AMD didn't show any benchmarks related to those features. They did play a clip with some developers who are working on upcoming titles talk about ray tracing and how it'll make the games visually look better. That's all fine and good, but the most important thing we have to know is how good will AMD's GPUs be able to perform when compared to Nvidia's when ray tracing is enabled. But they never talked about that at all, and this does concern me, and I think the reason for that is simply because Nvidia's Ampere GPUs will still come out ahead when ray tracing is enabled. How much faster will they be? Well, we still have to wait for third-party benchmarks to compare the cards, but I'm expecting there to be a considerable difference when ray tracing is enabled, and if we bring in DLSS 2.0 into the mix, then the margins will only become bigger. In regards to DLSS, AMD only briefly mentioned that they are working with Microsoft to build their own super sampling tech, but the fact that they didn't say anything else besides that or show any sort of concept only tells me that they won't have a feature like DLSS ready in the foreseeable future. And this is a shame because while the cards do look attractive at their price points, well, the 6900 XT and 6800 XT for that matter, I do think that most buyers who want to enjoy their games with the best ray tracing performance will still be opting for Nvidia. That's not to say that AMD's GPUs won't be able to deliver a decent playable experience with ray tracing, otherwise they wouldn't have mentioned anything at all. It's just that compared to their competitor, this is probably an area they'll need to improve upon significantly. Now, if you don't care about all of that stuff, ray tracing or super sampling techniques, then yeah, the 6800 XT or the 6900 XT are definitely the better options. But this is exactly why the 6800 at $579 is a tough sell, because it's more expensive than the RTX 3070 and will probably still lose to it when ray tracing is enabled. But perhaps AMD's ray tracing performance may become better over time, as we know consoles are essentially using the same tech and GPU architecture, and with more developers optimizing their engines and games for it, we should hopefully see the benefits of that come onto the PC platform. Now let's talk a little bit about AMD's Infinity Cache, because it does look quite intriguing. The Infinity Cache is this high density memory that boosts overall theoretical bandwidth that should help boost performance. After hearing the rumors about AMD only using a 256-bit bus and regular G6 memory, there was concern that their cards would be bandwidth starved and wouldn't be able to compete with Nvidia's. With their new Infinity Cache paired with a 256-bit G6 memory interface, AMD are claiming a bandwidth increase of over double when compared to traditional 384-bit and 256-bit interfaces. This also does lower performance consumption slightly. They also did mention some other stuff such as 30% higher frequencies, although that changes depending on the SKUs. And with RDNA 2, AMD managed to beat their goal of 50% performance per watt, reaching up to 54%. There were of course other features mentioned, like support for Microsoft's Direct Storage API, where they can leverage fast storage solutions like SSDs to load game assets, mesh shading, variable rate shading, and more. I'm not going to be going over every single one of those features. You guys can read about that yourselves, as I mainly just wanted to focus on the GPU announcements and comment on the performance figures that were shown, as this video will probably just go on forever then. So that was AMD's RX 6000 series announcement. Overall, I am fairly happy and pleased with what I saw. Like I had mentioned at the start of the video, I had been longing for competition to return to the high-end GPU market since forever, because I've always been a huge fan of Radeon GPUs, and seeing them go into this slump definitely displeased me as a hardware enthusiast and someone who's a fan of market competition. I mean, if you guys had been following my channel from the early days, I had been using the R9 390 graphics card then and absolutely loved that GPU. And I'll admit, when AMD didn't deliver with Vega, I did have a bit of a breakdown in that reaction video, but this was because I was genuinely rooting for AMD to punch Nvidia where it mattered and deliver competitive GPUs. With the RX 6000 series, they have delivered for the most part, offering similar performance in gaming and also being more efficient when compared to their competitor, something that hasn't actually happened in a while. Also, I really like how we got to see GPUs released by both manufacturers at around the same time, competing in the same time frame. I absolutely hated seeing Nvidia dominate and hog the market for themselves, only for AMD to show up a year late and disappoint everyone. But this time, that's not the case, and I do think they've threatened Nvidia's stronghold on the GPU market. Don't be surprised to see Nvidia retaliate by either rushing new GPUs again or pushing devs to opt for their tech. But then again, this is what competition is all about, and I welcome it. 2020 may have been a pretty bad and devastating year overall, depending on how you look at it. However, for gamers and tech enthusiasts, it's definitely been one of the better years in a while. There has been a lot of great hardware releases. There will definitely be more GPUs coming from both AMD and Nvidia, so stay tuned. I hope you guys found this video to be informative and helpful. Let me know your thoughts down below. Check out the video description on ways to support the channel and for my other videos. If you guys are interested in more content like this, then make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.